Toxic people have radar. They can spot who they can manipulate and who they can't within minutes of meeting someone. They don't waste time on people who won't break. They move on to easier targets, and the traits that make you a hard target have nothing to do with what you say. They're silent behaviors that signal you're not worth the effort. Let me show you the 8 silent behaviors that make toxic people avoid you entirely. Because protection from manipulation isn't about confrontation. It's about being the wrong kind of victim. Behavior 1. You're comfortable with silence and don't rush to fill gaps. Toxic people use awkward silence as a weapon. They'll say something inappropriate, then wait for you to smooth it over. They'll make unreasonable requests and let silence pressure you into compliance. They create discomfort and wait for you to resolve it by giving them what they want. But if you're comfortable with silence, if you can sit in the awkwardness without flinching, their weapon is useless. You don't rush to explain yourself. You don't fill the gap with nervous agreement. You just let the silence exist until they either back down or show their hand more clearly. Research from Columbia University shows that manipulators specifically target people who show discomfort with conversational pauses because that discomfort makes them predictable and controllable. When you don't react to silence the way they expect, they lose their leverage. Toxic people read this immediately. Within one conversation, they know whether silence works on you. If it doesn't, they move on. You're too much work. Behavior 2. You don't over-explain yourself or justify your decisions. When you set a boundary or say no, you state it once and stop talking. You don't provide elaborate reasons. You don't defend your choice. You don't seek their understanding or approval. You just deliver the boundary and end the sentence. I'm not available that day. Period. Not I am not available because I have this thing and I promised this person and I really wish I could, but that explanation is ammunition. It gives them something to argue with, to poke holes in, to manipulate around. Studies on boundary setting show that over-explanation signals uncertainty and invites negotiation. Brief, clear statements signal finality. Toxic people test boundaries by pushing back. If your boundary holds without you engaging in debate, they know you're not someone they can wear down. They need people who doubt themselves enough to keep explaining. You don't, so they leave you alone. Behavior 3. You maintain consistent energy regardless of their mood. Toxic people use emotional volatility to control others. They're warm and charming, then suddenly cold and distant. They create an emotional roller coaster that keeps you off balance, always trying to figure out which version you're re-getting and how to get back to the good one. But if your energy stays consistent regardless of theirs, if you're the same calm, grounded person whether they're being charming or hostile, you've broken the cycle. You're not reacting to their manipulation. You're not chasing the good version. You're just being steady. Research on emotional regulation shows that people who maintain stable effects in the face of others' emotional manipulation are significantly less likely to be successfully manipulated, because the manipulation requires your reaction. Without it, it's just them having mood swings while you remain unbothered. Toxic people recognize this quickly. They'll test you with hot and cold behavior. When you don't chase, don't panic. Don't change to accommodate their shifts. They know the emotional manipulation won't work. You're not the right target. Behavior 4. You have no visible need for their approval or validation. You don't seek their opinion on your choices. You don't look to them for reassurance. You don't change your behavior based on whether they seem pleased or disappointed. You exist independently of their assessment of you. This is critical because toxic people's primary currency is conditional approval. They give it and withdraw it strategically to control behavior. If you desperately need their approval, you'll do almost anything to get it back when they withdraw it. But if you genuinely don't need it, they have nothing to leverage. Studies show that manipulators specifically select targets who demonstrate need for external validation because that need creates dependency. When you show no signs of needing that validation, when you're clearly getting your sense of worth from internal or other external sources, you're not vulnerable to their primary control mechanism, take and tell. The way you don't wait for their reaction before proceeding. The way you don't ask for their opinion unless it's practically necessary. The way their disapproval doesn't change your course. You're self-validated. That makes you useless to them. Behavior 5. You observe more than you reveal. In early interactions, you ask questions and listen. You don't volunteer extensive personal information. You don't share your insecurities, your fears, your vulnerabilities with people you don't know well. You watch. You assess. You gather data while giving very little. Toxic people need information to manipulate effectively. They need to know what you want, what you fear, what you're insecure about. That information becomes their playbook. If you don't give them that information, if you remain somewhat opaque while they reveal themselves, they can't build an effective manipulation strategy. Research on manipulation tactics shows that manipulators rely heavily on information asymmetry. They gather extensive data about targets while revealing little about themselves. When you reverse this, when you're the one observing while remaining private, you've disrupted their process. They recognize this. You're asking them questions, but deflecting when they ask you. You're friendly, but not forthcoming. They can't get a read on what would work on you, so they move to someone more transparent. Behavior 6. Your life is clearly full without them. You have other relationships, interests, responsibilities, goals that occupy your time and energy. When they try to take up disproportionate space in your life, there's natural resistance because that space is already occupied. Toxic people look for emptiness, loneliness, people who have time and energy to spare, because filling that emptiness is how they create dependency. If your life is already full, if you're already busy with things and people you value, there's no space for them to colonize. Studies on relationship formation show that people with robust social networks and active lives are significantly less vulnerable to manipulation because they have alternatives. They're not dependent on any single relationship for their social or emotional needs. Toxic people can see this. You're not always available. You have other plans, other people, other priorities. You're not sitting around waiting for their attention. That means the withdrawal tactic won't work. You'll just spend time on the other things in your full life. Behavior 7. You're visibly unafraid of consequences. They might threaten. Toxic people control through fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of their anger, fear of what they might say or do, fear of losing what they provide. If you're genuinely unafraid of those consequences, if you'd be okay walking away or dealing with their worst behavior, they have no power. This shows up non-verbally. When they make a threat, implied or explicit, your body language doesn't change. You don't tense. You don't start accommodating. You don't negotiate. You remain calm and unchanged because you've already decided you're fine with whatever consequence they're threatening. Research on power dynamics shows that the person least afraid of the relationship ending has the most power in the relationship. Toxic people can sense who's afraid and who isn't. It's in your breathing, your posture, your facial micro-expression. If you're not afraid, they know their threats are hollow. Quietest. They might hint at leaving or withdrawing or being upset. If you don't scramble to fix it, if you're calmly accepting of that possibility, they know fear won't work, and they move on. Behavior 8. You respond to disrespect immediately and calmly. Not with anger. Not with explanation, just with immediate consequence. Someone crosses a line, you disengage. You don't warn them. You don't give them chances to explain. You don't try to make them understand why it was wrong. You just create distance. The first time they're disrespectful, you become less available, less warm, less engaged. It's subtle but immediate. And if it happens again, you remove yourself from the dynamic entirely. No drama, no confrontation, just natural consequence. Studies on boundary enforcement show that immediate, calm consequences are far more effective at changing behavior than delayed angry reactions. But more importantly for this purpose, toxic people recognize when someone has this pattern. They test boundaries. If the consequence is immediate and non-negotiable, they know this person won't tolerate gradual erosion of respect. They need people who will accept small violations, then bigger ones, then bigger ones. If you shut it down at the first violation, they know they can't run their usual slow-boil manipulation. You're not the frog that will sit in slowly heating water. Here's what all 8 behaviors have in common. They signal emotional regulation and clear boundaries without any verbal declaration. You're not announcing, "I won't be manipulated." You're just being someone who can't be manipulated. And toxic people can tell the difference immediately. They're looking for specific vulnerabilities. Need for approval. Fear of abandonment. Discomfort with conflict. Lack of options. Emptiness in their life. Fear of consequences. Willingness to accept disrespect. If you don't show these vulnerabilities, you're not a viable target. This isn't about being cold or closed off. You can be warm, kind, generous with people who've earned it, but serlion with people you don't know. These silent behaviors protect you by signaling you're not someone worth the effort of manipulating. Toxic people are efficient. They don't waste time on hard targets. They move on to people who show the vulnerabilities they can exploit. Be the person who shows none of them. Comfortable with silence. Brief with explanations. Steady in energy. Independent in validation. Private with information. Full in life. Unafraid of consequences. Immediate with boundaries. Master these 8 silent behaviors and toxic people will sense you read the wrong target before they even try. Not because you fought them off, because you were never vulnerable to their tactics in the first place. That's the best protection there is, not having to defend yourself, because there's nothing to defend against. You're simply not accessible to their manipulation. And they can tell, so they leave you alone and move on to easier prey. That's not cold. That's wise, and it keeps you safe without ever having to say a word.